Mr. Bascombe, could you give a Fletch clap, please?
There you go.
And we're going live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hi guys, and welcome to Piano and Keyboard Artist, where we discuss the artists related to pianos, keyboards and synthesizers. And my special guest, I'm honoured to have once again Mr. Dave Bascombe.
Hi.
Dave, how are you?
Very good, all. Nice to see you again.
Yes, thank you. Guys, as you will know, you've seen the Geek Talk videos, but now this is the moment we've all been waiting for as part of the Depeche Mode album review series, Music for the Masses. Dave Bascombe, as you know, if you've read the list below, who has been the producer or engineer of some of the most iconic records of our generation. We're now going to focus on Music for the Masses because
that's a big up.
Well, it's all true, and Music for the Masses is kind of like, as I say, because they just finished the trilogy with Gareth Jones, you know, and then of course you came along, and you know it does obviously have a different sonic change to it, and I believe it was Dave Garn who suggested you after hearing your Tears for Fears.
I've never been told definitely, but that's what I assume. I think he'd heard Shout, and it was Shout's quite a Depeche Mode sort of sounding.
Because that's funny you should say that, because when I was younger and I first heard Shout, let it out, it's got that Dave Garn kind of sound. I could actually have heard Depeche Mode could have done that.
Yeah, well, it was kind of the similar drum sounds and synths.
Yeah.
So I guess it was. Yeah, but, I mean, it was all part of that synth sound of the early 80s, I think.
Yeah. And of course, I have got a list of questions, and I think you freaked out when you saw the list, and I've had some of my subscribers answer the questions. Because, as I say, Dave, there is not enough information about you to satisfy the Depeche Mode fans, so I'm hoping we can address that.
Sure.
So let's start with Music for the Masses. It was 1987.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay. That's good to know.
And let's start off with the sequencing. What was used to sequence it?
Oh, what, the order? The track order? Oh, no, sorry, the sequencers. Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, my God.
He is the producer, guys, I promise you.
Now, let me think.
Go on.
It's a Yumi 4B, BBC.
That's right.
Yumi 4.
Well, we'd use that was one of the methods. Martin there was this system called Yumi, which you just reminded me of, which ran on the BBC computer. Martin really liked that, as did Vince from Depeche Mode, for many years. It was beautifully simple, really clear, and again, it was lovely because it had limitations.
Yeah.
Nothing like sophistication you could do nowadays. I think we also used an early version of Cubase, but I might be completely wrong, on an Atari. Or actually, okay, this is really getting the memory cells going here, but I've got a feeling that maybe Martin wrote on Cubase his demos, and then we kind of translated them either manually or I think we synced them up, that and the Yumi, and transferred the from the MIDI information from Cubase into the Yumi. That's ringing a really vague bell, but I think because maybe Yumi was tighter in MIDI, the timing was better. Anyway, I could be wrong, but I think that's what we did.
I think we did, yeah.
Some of the stuff, we had a synclaver as well, and I think we might have used occasionally the sequencer in that for certain things.
I see.
But yes, it was mainly Yumi, I think you're right. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Simon.
Yeah, I've forgotten. But.
He's kind of like my go-to guy on the channel when I get stuck with the...
Well, I know you're talking about Depeche, but Yumi I first encountered on Tears for Fears a couple of years before that.
I see.
And this is one of the really early sequences. It was, really, yeah.
Dave, now, obviously, there's a lot of misinformation, and that's why we're here today, to kind of set the record straight, if you can remember, because it was a long time ago. Now, some people have said, we know the term producer and engineer is sometimes a term that is kind of loosely and interchangeably used. But were you the producer and engineer of this, or it was produced by you and Depeche Mode?
No, I think, I got a co-production credit, but I would... mainly engineering, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay, so that comes on to the next question. It is my... I can just see Alan being sort of like the driving force behind
Totally,
this.
yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Warning. Alan Wilder, fanboy alert. Warning.
I mean, it's interesting because someone mentioned pre-production, and so the first thing that I did remember was feeling a bit odd was that Alan would take Martin's demos and take them to his place and rework them, arrange them and stuff, basically pre-production stuff.
Yeah.
But Martin wasn't involved at all, which I found a little bit strange
Right.
because, but I assume, I mean, I don't know, but I assumed that they had a way of working they've done with Daniel,
Yes.
and I presumed it was Daniel and Gareth probably, and Alan. And that was the way they did it. And I think Martin wasn't interested in the recording process at all, really.
Yeah.
And I think possibly, I'm guessing, but I think a few reasons. First of all, it's pretty boring.
Yes.
And he's not interested in the nuts and bolts, the day-to-day
Sure.
stuff. Secondly, I got a feeling that there was a kind of axis there with Daniel and Alan where even though it's his songs, they would take it, they had a positive way they wanted to do. And him to sort of interject and say, I'm not happy with this, it was a bit of a big deal.
Oh, I see.
It happened a few times, and it usually would go through Fletch if he wasn't happy about something. Yeah, Fletch was the spokesman. Martin didn't want confrontation, really.
Yeah, he's a very gentle kind of guy.
But I know later on, I'm sure Martin got much more involved. I think on the Violator and from.
Well, he had
there
no
on.
choice, really.
Well, I guess
After Alan left, he'd have to.
Well, yeah, but that was after Violator.
After Songs of Faith and Devotion.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I think it's sort of. But I mean, obviously, someone needs to be steering the ship, and that was definitely Alan's baby.
Definitely Alan.
Without a doubt, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing I wasn't there. I mean, I find it. My job wasn't there to come and sort of rock the boat and say, right, I don't like this way of doing things. As I said, there was these weird rules.
Sure.
Which I found quite amusing. But
Yeah.
but they definitely had a point, and I wasn't going to say, fuck the rules. Let's change it all. You know. So.
Yeah.
I mean, there was one thing I remember doing Never Let Me Down, and Alan had decided that there's a little piano section between the verse and the chorus.
Dun, 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 dun,
Yeah.
dun, dun.
Well, he wanted to get rid of those.
Oh, really?
And I thought, I quite like them. And it wasn't a big deal. He just said, okay, if you like them, we'll leave them in. And I was thinking
can't
about
imagine it without it.
Well, exactly.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
thinking about it, I thought about occasionally. For a single, he probably was right. His instinct was probably right because it's not necessary. And for a single, it would have made it much more direct. So what we should have done is do a single version when it finally came out. But by then, we'd all forgotten about this thing. But it would have gone straight, don't bore us, get to the chorus. That stupid cliche.
Yeah.
But it would have done, And I often wonder, there's no right and wrong.
Yes.
But his instinct was that was unnecessary. And I but as you said, I love that little moment.
Yes.
So.
Well.
But that's happened a lot where Martin's unnecessary moments will be edited out.
Oh, I see.
Quite ruthlessly sometimes. And Martin would take a lot when Martin would feel strong enough to fight to keep those kind of things.
It's a little bit like being philosophical here. You get when buildings go up, you get an architect who's essentially the dreamer. Then you get the civil engineer that goes, what's holding that roof up? And that's really where I understand Martin's going in, and Alan made it more functional.
And structured.
With his musicality and everything.
Totally, it's structuring it, which is what pre-production's all about. But
Absolutely. And coming on to, as I say, I'll have to. We won't go through these questions in format. I'll have to jump through them as we flow.
So just one thing before we do that. I know just from interviews and stuff that Flood got rid of that process and they started working directly from Martin's demos in the studio, which I think is, in a way, I wish I'd sort of. It was beyond my brief to sort of even I wouldn't have gone there, but I think that was.
He was quite bold, wasn't he?
Yeah, much more than I was, and but that was a really good step, I think, because Martin's demos had a real something to them. Obviously, demos usually do. So yeah.
So on the subject of demos, if you can remember, Dave, which song do you think deviated furthest from the demo, and which ones?
I don't remember them. Apart from Never Let Me Down, which I mentioned. I can't what they sounded like now.
It's probably an unfair question. Really.
Well, no, because Martin had this. A lot of them were kind of very glam. I mean, some of that survived. Some of that spirit survived in Sacred, I think. But he had these kind of. So it was all quite. It's not the right word, but kitsch in a way, in a good way, And that was kind of ironed out a lot. But obviously, I can't remember the name of the titles, but I think Little 15.
Little 15.
It's obviously so orchestral that had nothing to do with the demo. So.
Alan said in an interview that Little 15 was left till the end because I think that they didn't know what to do with it, so they left it till the end. But
wow, I don't remember that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And as I say, I've had to brush up on the.
But that's a classic example. Obviously, it's so Alan because it's all these little orchestral samples that we've spent ages gathering together.
And that was interesting. Like if we look these days, you just buy a sample library. And, in those days it was. Now, if we take like the samples at the end of Never Let Me Down Again, you did have this big cinematic sound. Where did those samples come from?
I think it was Carmina Burana.
Okay.
We'll probably get sued though if you say that. So.
Oh well.
It depends who performed it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you just sampled that in.
Yeah,
and put it in,
just somebody. But I mean, it took ages getting it all in time, and
Of course.
and tune, which obviously now is piece of piece.
with the technology. Yeah, so it was really, and we don't want to get all Alan Wilder fanboy here, but the record would have been fundamentally different had Alan not been there.
Absolutely.
Because Alan was really the one, because he loved the studio. He loved he was really, and I've heard from sources that Martin, as you said, he's not that precious. He'll bring the demo in, and as long as he'll speak up when he doesn't like what he hears, but he doesn't really want to spend the time in there. Whereas Alan thrived.
I mean, one other example where Martin did speak up was Strangelove, the original, the album version, not the single version. No, sorry, the single version. Not the single was first, and then we redid it for the album. And the single,
just more upbeat and a bit more
much
poppy.
more upbeat. But I know that Alan had put in a slow bass line. Yeah. And one of the few things that Martin said, no, I like the fast. And my classic contribution as a co-producer was go, why don't you use both?
The one as the single and one as the album.
No. We actually did shoehorn both bass lines into the single version. So you've got like, I can't remember what it is now, but and then the as well. Yeah. Which was a bit of we had to manipulate it a bit to make it fit, but everyone kind of went, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
So it was all quite easy going in that sense.
Because that was one of the questions here. The Strangelove on the album, I prefer that version. It's a lot more stripped back and it's a lot more moody, whereas the single version's a bit more, which is probably what was required for a single, a bit more poppy.
Well, actually, I'm the other way around because, but at the time, I certainly preferred. But what happened with the album version is that because the single had come out, and we were still making the album, it came out in advance of the album. So Daniel had done a remix, extended version of Strangelove, and he got that vibe, that groove, which is much slower, sort of half time. Don't blaze. And we loved it. We thought it was great. So we adapted that to for the album version. But actually, and it is very good. But actually, coming back to it, I think I prefer the single version. It's just got the energy,
I suppose so. Yeah.
But they're both good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but funny, I don't remember anybody ever asking Martin about these sort of things, which is quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, maybe they did. Maybe there's a discussion I wasn't part of, but it was just kind of, we reworked it and that just went on the album.
Dave, you mixed this album as well.
Yeah.
So that's just we want to clear, because sometimes an engineer will just record and then because on the vinyl it just says you're engineer, so you do. So when you mixed this, were you sitting with Martin or Alan?
Alan.
So it was you and Alan.
Yeah. And Dave occasionally would come in, but Martin really, I don't remember.
Look, and as I say, I don't want to discuss bands' personalities because I don't think it's a classy thing to do, and we all know how things happen. But do you ever feel that Martin may have felt a bit intimidated by Alan, because Alan really sort of taking his things? Was there a...
Well, all I can say on that is that I think if there was, it was a hangover from when it was Alan and Daniel and Gareth as this kind of axis of heads down, solid, concentrated work, which is quite hard to break into, even if you're the writer, and say, actually, hold on a minute, I know you spent a week doing this, but I preferred it as it was. It's quite a hard thing to, it's a disruptive thing to say. So I don't know if he's intimidated by Alan. I mean, I think Alan had the vision, and he was, he's firmly in there. And I say when to interject if you're not happy. It's like when you're a week in, when you're a day in, it's hard to know. And sometimes I think just let it go and see what happens. And it could turn out great. Well, obviously, lots of times it did. So,
so the general mood throughout the making of the record was quite upbeat. Because I remember in a documentary you said you saw Fletch and you thought he looked like a philosophy student, but he used to party the hardest. Because him and Dave didn't do much in the studio. Am I right to say that?
No. And it was, the thing is, when I met them, I had no idea what they were going to be like, but I had a vision of quite an intense, they're sort of on the dark side, if you like,
but they're not. They're so
they're not.
jolly,
not at all. And another reason why I felt a bit intimidated starting it, because it was a completely different way of working than I was used to.
Yeah.
And when you come in with a band that are established like that and have had a bit of success, there's a whole infrastructure around it, roadies and stuff, and you feel like obviously you're being judged by everyone. So I didn't want to come in and say, we should do this, that, and the other. So. What was the point?
No. Well, actually, if I can sort of elaborate on what you just made there. So your approach was quite, instead of, was the logical thing, because obviously they're a big band. It's a bit nerve-wracking when, you know, a band of that level come in. Not that you hadn't worked with bands that big until this point, but I think your approach to just say, okay, guys, what do you want? And you kind of just let them steer it was probably the right way to go, I think.
And I sort of maybe underestimated my contribution to it. In that sense, but having just listened to it today, I thought actually there is a sound to it.
Oh no, you should be very proud of it. I mean,
but it's of its time. I think there's a lot of reverb on things, which is very 80s. But actually, well, when we came to do the remix, the 5-1 remixes a few years later, I was working with a Kevin from Mute, who was a great engineer. But I remember he'd got the basis of one of the tracks. I think it was Never Let Me Down up. He had that going. And I thought, wow, that just sounds completely wrong. Not because he'd done it wrong. It's just that. Obviously, you're so used to hearing things a certain way. And anyway, my point is, there was a reverb or a reverb combination that I'd used on those drums that gave it a certain feel. Yeah. And he hadn't quite got that. It wasn't hugely wrong, but instead of like, it just felt really weird. And whoa. So anyway, the point is, I was pleased with the reverb, the overall sound that it gave the record.
Yeah, so I think reverb was kind of synonymous with atmosphere in those days.
Absolutely, we all overdid it, but it feels like a bit. Listen to it just now. It feels like a bit of a period piece because of that. But I don't mind that. It has got a nice atmosphere.
It's of the time, but it was groundbreaking at the time.
Yeah. But there was a tendency to overdo it sometimes.
Well, right. So this was recorded in Paris, and the studio was like an old cinema.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't involved in the studio choice, but it was basically because it had all these fantastic instruments knocking about. So there was timps and orchestral bass drums,
which
all this kind of stuff.
Were used on Pimp and
That's
all
right.
this.
Yeah.
And there was a piano there as well?
Yeah, lovely piano. And I can't remember what it was now. I think it might have been a Steinway, but beautiful.
It's an upright?
Big grand.
And that was the piano that Alan played for, like, all the parts.
Yeah, everything's done.
Yes, so if we take, like, for instance, like Stiania or Pimp, it's the dun 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 dun. It's that loop. So he would have played that. That would have been recorded.
It was all manually played.
And then that would be put into the session. So it wasn't sort of like metronomically programmed.
No. No, he's a great piano player. So.
He is. Yeah.
And in fact, on Pimp, we did it in sequences. So he played one whole round.
Yeah.
And then rather than to keep going forever, or drop in. He would then on separate tracks he'd do the other one, and we just. It was a seamless overlap.
Yeah.
Because it was all... Yeah.
Because they've, we don't want to sort of like jump albums yet, because obviously they had Violator after this, and then there was Songs of Faith and Devotion. And I do find that there are strong similarities in Music for the Masses and Songs of Faith and Devotion. Not so, as far as the sort of kind of religious thing, but also... Violator was fundamentally a very metronomic album. Very techno-y metronomic. Whereas this one does have those elements of performance and kind of rocky. And someone has said, I must ask you about the snare on Never Let Me Down Again.
Right. Well, that's from The When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin.
Yes.
And I know it's been used a billion times, but I don't think it had ever been used before, maybe once. But as a kid, I'd always, like lots of kids, thought that it's just the most fantastic, exciting drum sound in the world. And I always wondered if there'd been a kind of way to use it somehow. And I'm not sounding like some, prophet, but I thought I'd love to be able to use those samples. They weren't samples back then, but I'd like to use them somehow. And I envisaged some sort of sense of... Anyway, so when it came to it, that's one of the things I did with Alan in pre-production. I said, right, I've got just the drum sounds for that. That's great. And it was. And we added a couple of other little bits with them because they're pretty lo-fi.
Sure.
But that's...
Yeah,
it worked perfectly for that track.
And as you say, the cinema had like, so you used like a stairwell for the acoustic spaces.
Yeah.
And you record.
Well, that's the other thing that really I'd never come across before, where the first few days at the studio we're just going around banging things and recording samples.
Oh, yeah.
Snare drums and bass drums, which were kind of utilitarian, but everything,
throwing in
bass drum, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, and I'd have only ever, it's early days of samples, but I'd always made a sample when required. So you'd be working a song and think, okay, we need a biscuit tin here.
Yeah.
Go out and bash one. But no, the first 2 days we're doing
randomly hitting things.
So it's really strange. And then we built this little library. But obviously, and again, it's probably one of these rules that they've been doing. Because it gives you this toolbox, that's a shitty word, but this thing to draw from.
Sure.
So it gave you a colour to the album.
Sure.
And it was we did a lot of sampling in Gulham Tell, the studio.
Yeah.
We went through a lot of their old samples from previous albums, used a few of those. I had quite a big library of stuff that I'd just transferred on some primitive digital. And I've been collecting sounds for a few years. And I also had an emulator and had a few bits and pieces on that. So, so we sort of did swap, mix up the sounds in that way.
Yeah. So you actually say you actually use some of the sounds from previous albums? And
a few, yeah. I mean, for instance, I think on Never Let Me Down, the tom-toms are a combination of the toms from Stripped, mixed with some other samples.
And that was sacrilege to their own workflow. It never used the same sound twice.
But it was a mix. In fact, we probably went for something else originally.
Yeah.
And then we thought, well, actually, I mean, I love those sounds on Stripped. So if it was really good, well, we could break the rules occasionally.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about hi-hats in the other interview.
Yeah, what was the problem with the hi-hats?
Well, we weren't allowed to use hi-hats.
They didn't like that.
Yeah, it's just like they were just boring. Everyone used hi-hats. And we broke that a couple of times. But one of the ones that sticks in my head as a kind of example of the way we worked was on, I think it was on Nothing. There's a hi-hat. It's not a traditional hi-hat. I think it's just going yeah. Well, that's actually that's not a hi-hat. It's a pneumatic coach door.
Oh,
so it was a band I was working with like 5 years earlier, and they had a bus, and I'd noticed this sound of the thing, and we didn't have portable recorders then, so I'd put a load of cables together and ran a mic out from the control to the street where the bus was, and we recorded this thing, and it went
really?
With a clonk on the end.
And that was the sound.
We probably used the clonk as well, something else, but yeah, that sound is a pneumatic door. So, and I was it's nice that I was like, even though I didn't have a big library of this sort of stuff, but it was totally in Depeche Mode style to do that sort of thing.
Wow. I'm saying to my subscribers, guys, this is amazing to hear this. This information's not out there. I'm so flattered to have you here, Dave, or for me to be here.